It is often said that the Beatles were the greatest band of all time, but it's so hard to quantify exactly what that means, because music is an art, and art is in the eye of the beholder. Some people love the sound of the Beatles, others not so much. It's been 61 years since their debut album, so we thought we might try and remove the subjective and break down the Beatles by the numbers. For such an influential band, you may be surprised to learn that they were only producing records for 7 years, between 1963 and 1970. In that time, they produced 12 studio albums, 63 singles, and over 50 compilation albums, not to mention 5 feature films. In their short time together, they toured and performed over 1,400 shows. Their biggest live audience came in 1965 when they played Shea Stadium in front of 55,000 screaming fans. But their biggest show of all time is undoubtedly the Ed Sullivan Show, when an estimated 73 million people tuned in. It was the most watched broadcast of its time. They stopped touring in 1966 and decided to focus on studio work. To this day, they still have the record for the most #1 singles at 20. They've been at the top of the singles list since 1965 when they booted the King from his throne, with a whopping 64 total songs charting on the Hot 100. To this day, they still have the most total weeks charted at #1, with an almost 50-week lead over Taylor Swift. Their longest running #1 was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, charting at the top position for 15 weeks back in 1967. Their most recent chart topper is their Best Of album, interestingly called One, which charted at the top in February 2001. There was one point in 1964 where they held spots 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with Can't Buy Me Love, Twist and Shout, She Loves You, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and Please Please Me, with 7 other Beatles songs in the top 100. This is a record many music experts say will never be broken. As far as platinums go, well, they haven't done too bad, with 42 total platinums, which is second place, a category where the King is still on his throne, unless you want to talk about double platinum, in which case the Beatles are back on top. When it comes to best-selling artists of all time, the Beatles are on the top of that list as well. According to Chartmasters, a site that gives daily updates about the top artists, it should also be noted that for simplicity's sake, Chartmasters breaks down their numbers to equate to equivalent album sales. The Beatles have sold 160,650,000 studio albums, 203,392,000 best of and compilation albums, 126,400,000 physical singles, 35,230,000 digital units, topping it off with 23,039,000 streams. If you're looking for pure raw numbers that don't equate to estimated album sales, let's talk about their Spotify numbers. The Beatles have a total of 37 million monthly listeners, which places them at 49 most listened to on Spotify. In 2023, their song Here Comes the Sun reached 1 billion streams. Now you might be thinking these numbers are a little lackluster for the greatest band of all time. However, it should be noted that it took a while for the Beatles to become available on digital streaming, not joining iTunes until 2010 and not coming to Spotify until late 2015. But on Spotify, they've still managed to rack up a total of 19,883,982,103 streams, with over 10 million daily streams. While their YouTube library isn't as robust as their Spotify library, they aren't slouches either, with Don't Let Me Down being their top video with over 500 million views. Their total YouTube library comes in at 3.5 billion views. All of their movies performed very well, except for Magical Mystery Tour. A Hard Day's Night made roughly 4.5 million. Help also made around 4.5 million. Magical Mystery Tour was produced as a TV special and was critically panned. The animated film Yellow Submarine is reported to have been both a critical and financial success. We had trouble finding out accurate box office information. IMDb seems to be listing numbers from a 2018 re-release, and all the other websites are purporting that these numbers are from the 60s, which doesn't seem accurate to us. The final film, Let It Be, came out after the Beatles had announced their breakup. The film was not without contention from the 4 band members, but Peter Jackson restored a lot of the original tapes and painted a different picture in Get Back, released on Disney Plus in 2021, with over 1 million completed streams of the series. The Beatles have been nominated for 111 awards, winning 52 of them, including an Oscar for Best Original Soundtrack and 11 Grammy Awards. It's incredibly difficult to say how much money the Beatles have generated. While for most of their time together as a band, they themselves didn't actually make a ton of money. The lion's share went to the studio and management. There's no exact figure on how much money the band generated, but it's estimated to be in the billions. Apple Corps is the company the Beatles set up to manage themselves, their projects, and other business ventures, including Apple Records. Their company is still around, and based on the reports we were able to find, the last 5 years have been pretty good for them, generating tens of millions of dollars a year. Though they may not have been making stacks in the 60s, it all worked out for them in the long run. Paul McCartney has been far and away the most successful member of the band, as he is currently worth $1.3 billion. That isn't to say the other guys were doing poorly either. The other current living Beatle, Ringo, is worth $350 million. At the time of their deaths, George Harrison and John Lennon were worth $400 million and $620 million respectively. A lot of that came post-Beatles, but a large chunk of that was from their original success and continuation of carrying out the Beatles brand throughout the decades. It's not like the Beatles froze in 1970 and never did anything again. They've continued with legacy projects throughout the years, with projects like Anthology, Love, the aforementioned Get Back, plus their most recent project, Now and Then, all of which continue to generate financially and continue to add to the public psyche. It really is impossible to undersell how big the Beatles were. At one point, John Lennon said the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. So is that true? Well, at the time Jesus would have been around, the max amount of people who would have been following him would be around 5,000, give or take. And the Beatles certainly surpassed that. All time, it seems like Jesus has them beat, but I'm sure Jesus would have been a Beatles fan. Even if you don't care for their music, it's clear their cultural impact was massive, and their numbers don't lie about everything they accomplished. You have to be able to respect that. And if you don't, you're just trying to be edgy by not liking the popular thing. When it comes to the Beatles, there's really only one number you need to know, and that's number 1. They are the number 1 band in so many categories. There are so many different metrics to try and show how big the Beatles were and still are. We could make this video hours long if we went over every little thing. This is really only the broad strokes. Perhaps we'll make a part 2. Let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. If you're interested in learning more about the Beatles yourself, then we suggest starting with the articles we used in the making of this video, all of which are linked below. And it would really please me if you subscribed so you don't miss out on the next tasty knowledge burger.